What makes a work of philosophy worth thinking about? Well, there's probably a number of ways we could answer that question. A few things that come to mind for me are that first, that a text will have some kind of a controversial conclusion. By controversial, I don't mean that it's provocative just for the sake of being provocative. Rather, I simply mean that the conclusion a philosopher arrives at is one that not everybody will agree with. If there's some people who agree with the philosopher's conclusion and other people who don't agree with it, then that means there's a conversation to be had. If everybody simply agrees on how wonderful the philosopher's argument is, well then, we're not really having a philosophical discussion, we're just having a philosopher fan club meeting, basically. Of course, even beyond that, most philosophical disagreements are a bit more complex than simply, I disagree, or I don't disagree. It's usually more like, I agree, however, or I disagree because, or I disagree with the way you, whatever. Even if all we can do is discuss and disagree about the merits of a philosopher's argument, I think that's great. I think that's what philosophy is about, largely. But what makes a philosophical text really interesting to me anyway, what I think makes a work of philosophy special, is if the exercise of studying that text can, in and of itself, occasion an experience in which one enriches their capacity for philosophical thinking overall. In other words, if reading a philosophical text can actually change the way that you think, regardless of what you think about what the philosopher is saying. I mean, there's a reason that in an intro to philosophy class, you might read Descartes' Meditations or Plato's Republic or something. It's not just because everybody agrees with what these philosophers say. No, actually, if anything, what makes conversations about those texts interesting is the people who have disagreed. I think this can best be accomplished, actually, just going off of my own experience, by spending a lot of time working very closely with a philosopher whose work you completely disagree with. And that's why I've spent the last 3 months reading The Abolition of Work by philosopher Bob Black. In The Abolition of Work, which was published in 1985, philosopher Bob Black argues that work should be abolished. And when he says work should be abolished, he means work should be abolished. One thing Black has going for him is he's not somebody who minces words. And he thinks that work should be abolished on the grounds that requiring people to work is both unethical and unnecessary. Instead of work, Black thinks we should be free to devote our time to play, that is, to activities that are more meaningful, more fulfilling, and more essential to us as human beings, insofar as they are activities which we perform just for their own sake. We just like doing them, whereas work is a very different category of activity. And we'll get into the distinctions Black raises between these two kinds of activities as we work through this text. I saw this essay mentioned somewhere a few months ago. I decided to check it out. I wasn't convinced. Specifically, I wasn't convinced that abolishing work is necessary. I don't think there's even a remote possibility that it would ever take place, but stranger things have happened. Even so, like I said, I don't think it's necessary. I think there are plenty of other ways to solve problems about work and society besides getting rid of work. I was also concerned that Black either didn't consider or didn't share some of what I think were much wider implications that such an extreme proposal would have, implications that reach far past work itself. I think Black kind of sells this proposal as like, don't worry, work is the root of all evil, we're going to get rid of it, and there won't be any more problems. Well, I don't know. Not so sure about that. This series will begin with a summary of Black's paper and an explication of his arguments. It will end with my rebuttal of his arguments. In between those two talks, there will be several videos where I talk about different aspects of his paper, focusing on different kinds of problems that I see, different approaches we might take to critiquing his work, as well as what I call putting him on the bookshelf. By this I mean trying to situate Black's perspective within a broader trend or broader trends within the history of philosophy. That's something that I've tried to do with the Theses on Feuerbach, for example. That's primarily a history of philosophy series more than anything. And so that will kind of be the focus of maybe one or two talks here. Unlike other talks that I've given on this channel, this will be the first time that I'm presenting mostly a criticism of the text in question. It's not the first time that I'm discussing a philosopher with whom I disagree, but it will be the first time that I'm kind of making this fact known. What I won't be doing in this series is I won't be analyzing any kind of social movements that might be associated with Black's paper, although I am aware that Black's paper is seen by some people, perhaps many people, as kind of a basic text for some larger, I think kind of nebulous set of ideas that some people consider a movement. I also will not be making any attempt to tie Black's paper into a discussion of any broader trend in the economy or society. So this is not going, I'm not going to be discussing like the Great Resignation. The focus of this series will be on Black's argument in the essay, The Abolition of Work. What I think the biggest problems are in that essay, and on whatever we can take away from studying these problems. One of the things that motivated me really to want to cover this essay is because, quite frankly, I found it pretty much impossible to track down any serious academic criticism of Bob Black's essay. I found a lot of people on various internet forums talking about how great his essay is. I found plenty of, online kind of zines, anarchist zines arguing with Bob Black, but these were mostly like ideological differences. These weren't philosophical disagreements. His Wikipedia page is useless. There's not even a section devoted to criticisms of his work. It basically reads like a biography on Amazon.com or something. So I started getting a little frustrated, and then I thought to myself, well, why not do something about it? My hope is that I can share with you some of what I've learned through this exercise, and that others can hopefully take something away from this, hopefully something that enriches the way that you read philosophy in general. That's been my experience, not just with critiquing this paper, but anytime I spend a substantial amount of time with a philosopher who thinks very differently from me and takes very different views from me, it's one of the most potent, most impactful kind of experiences that philosophy can give you. Like I said, it's the kind of thing that, it's the kind of instance where philosophy actually helps me outside of philosophy. And so if I can pass some of that on to you, then I'll feel good. I'll feel like I've done my job. Regardless of whether you come away with this with the same view that I have about this essay specifically or not. So, without any further ado, let's get to work.